everybody, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show where I, Matt the Gameboy, will take you through the highs and lows of the Gameboy library, one cart at a time. It's time to kick off Japanuary with the Tower of Druaga. The year was 1984, and Namco was facing a problem. How do you follow up a hit like Pac-Man? After several sequels, an animated series, and a derivative work or two, it was clear that Pac-Man fever was coming to an end. So, how to top it? A Rally X and a few other titles later, Namco decided to try and merge the maze game concept with pen and paper role-playing games. Dungeons & Dragons had, of course, inspired many early video game designers like Richard Garriott and William Crowther to attempt to recreate the magic of tabletop role-playing games in a digital experience. Just how to do that, though, differed wildly as people began to define the genre. But while games like Ultima, Wizardry and Rogue began to rise in popularity in the West, Japanese developers began to make RPGs of their own. Titles like Dungeon and Black Onyx aped the Western releases, while games like Dragon and Princess and Underground Exploration tried to do their own thing. Other games followed, and Namco, spotting a trend, decided to try their hand at making something in a similar vein. Taking the basic premise of a maze game, some elements from RPGs of the day, and a lot of inspiration from D&D monster manuals, they tried to take the basic premise of a role-playing game from the home to the arcade, and in the process, created what could be argued as the world's first action RPG. That game was, of course, the Tower of Druaga. While Druaga wouldn't make its way to the West for another decade, the game was a huge success in Japan. You play as the hero Gilgamesh, who must climb a 60-floor tower to save Kai, a priestess of the goddess Ishtar, from the evil demon Doruāga. Kai, Ishtar and Gilgamesh are all characters from Mesopotamian mythology, with the tower itself apparently being a reference to the Bible's Tower of Babel. Doruāga is a bit harder to pin down, but much like the series' other enemies like slimes, ropers and will-o-wisps, I'd argue he's probably been lifted straight out of a D&D monster manual. For the sake of this video, dear viewers, I think that's as far as we need to go down the mythological rabbit hole. The game is, well, how do I put this gently? Probably amongst the hardest and purposely most cryptic games ever designed. At the off, it might seem simple. You walk around a dungeon, killing enemies, collecting a key to unlock the door to the next floor, and progress onwards. That would be fine if on each level there wasn't a treasure chest you needed to collect, in order to upgrade Gilgamesh with new equipment or special items required for him to progress upwards. That's great, you must be thinking, just pick up that chest too then. But what if I told you that you needed to take very specific steps in order to make these chests appear? Like killing a whole floor of enemies in a specific order, standing still for a specified amount of time, or a damned button combination. It's madness! But sometimes madness is what drives people to play games. Druaga became a hit because of its opaque nature, with players banging their heads against the game and the community around the local arcade working together to figure the game out. The series' popularity only continued when it was released on the Famicom the following year, of course with a few changes around how each chest spawns to keep the game's inherent puzzle dynamic intact. A few sequels, a prequel, ports and remakes followed, before the Tower of Druaga finally got a Game Boy port in 1990. Boy, had to take a long way around on that one. Unsurprisingly, the Game Boy game is very much like the arcade and Famicom versions that came before it. Taking control of Gil in his wonderful golden armour, you scale the tower, treasure chest obscurity and all, in order to save Kai from the clutches of the evil demon Doruāga. On the game's 60 floors, while the layout of the map almost never changes, the enemies, door key and chest all randomly spawn around the room, meaning no run of Doruāga is ever the same. The only constant thing about each floor is the trigger to the treasure, its contents, and the time limit you've got to bang your head against while trying to figure out how to reveal it. However, be warned, not all chests are even worth revealing, as if the prospect of trying to figure out how to trigger the chest wasn't bad enough, certain ones will contain drain potions that will take some of Gil's health, meaning you start the next level at a disadvantage. The only in-game way to tell if a chest is worth picking up at all is literally trial and error. They don't look any different, don't make any kind of noise, you just end the level and lose health for your troubles. But hey, the arcade or Famicom game didn't even have a HP counter. You just have to guess at Gil's health in each stage. Told you the game was maddening. But why do you need help? Well, because Tower of Druaga involves quite a bit of combat. As I said up top, this is an action RPG of sorts. However, unlike, say, Zelda, Gil doesn't swing his sword to attack. Instead, the player must hold down either A or B to draw Gil's sword, and after a short animation, you'll be armed with it, ready to fight, which you do by running into enemies. Yes, folks, this is where games like Ys, Hydride, and Dragon Slayer got their bump combat mechanics from. Ironically, Dragon Slayer would beat Doruāga onto everyone's favourite game in handheld by a few months, but that's a story for another time. Gil will generally kill most enemies in one hit, but as you progress, you will encounter tougher enemies like knights, ropers, and even dragons that will either take more than one pass through with the sword, or specialist equipment from the game's treasure chests. Gil can also come across pickaxes in these treasure chests that allow him to knock down walls by again pressing A or B to use them, as well as things like flying boots or new armour. You see, RPG elements! While Gil's stats aren't displayed in numbers, each item you acquire on his quest, viewable with the select button, increases your overall health, speed, or strength by the nature of having discovered them. This does, however, mean that most of the items are mandatory for completing the game. You can even get to the 59th floor, as I discovered, miss an item, then be unable to land a hit on Druaga or beat the game. Yep, it's a bloody hard game, alright. But I, for one, really appreciated the challenge. That was after I'd fought the urge to throw my controller in rage, at least. If you do find yourself dying through other circumstances, however, the game offers unlimited continues, and after each 10th stage, a password in order to continue later. They're long, sure, but hey, I for one still appreciate the gesture. To earn the password though, you're going to have to defeat a mini-boss, something exclusive to the Game Boy version of the game. Oh no, I hear you cry. Well, don't worry, they're mostly a pushover if you've collected all the chests on the way up, and they only take a hit or two to go down for good. The sprite work on them's quite cute though, so at least there's that. Also, you get the chest for beating them, so it's an easy win. Provided, as I've said, you've got the equipment from the prior floors to beat them easily. Like other versions of the Game Boy version of Druaga also has another tower mode, i.e. once the player has beaten the game, there's another 60 floors for the player to beat with alternate solutions to revealing the level's chests. That's good replay value for sure. Beating the game in another tower mode is also the only way to get the game's fourth and unsurprisingly best ending, as yes, depending on how many continues you use in Route A, you'll get a different image at the end denoting your success that I won't spoil here. However, despite these quality of life improvements with the HP gauge, passwords and fun mini-bosses, the Game Boy version of Druaga does suffer some setbacks due to the hardware. First of all, the lack of colour on the system does make the sprite work feel pretty monotonous. It would be a minor grumble if a few of the chests weren't uncovered by defeating enemies with minor variations to the sprite instead of the palette swaps presented in the arcade and home console versions. Not to mention that this lack of colour makes figuring out what level your equipment is an absolute nightmare. Those looking to avoid this issue in the sprite work may want to look up the Namco Museum 2 copy of the game, as the Collections version has Super Game Boy support, something I was unable to test at the time of the recording, but will definitely do a comparison video of at some time in the future. The game also tears in some of the later more hectic levels, and suffers from some slowdown due to so much going on screen. I do also miss having your gear at the bottom of the screen like the original, but once I got used to pressing select, it wasn't too much of an issue. And to be honest, I do like the Game Boy version of the game's theme. All in all, I would say that the Tower of Druaga on Game Boy is a pretty solid port of a pretty solid game. While I know the need to figure out each floor's tricks is right up some players' alleys, for those of you looking to maintain their sanity and enjoy the game, I'd recommend using a guide. There's still some challenge to the game without the puzzle dynamics, as enemies can be relentless, but I admit this isn't the proper way to play the game. Also, have no fear, as despite the game being a Japanese exclusive release, it's all in English! Hooray! Those looking to check out the arcade version will be glad to know it's also readily available on multiple formats, including the newest Namco Museum release for Switch. I, for one, was really inspired by this game to play more of the series, and it's perhaps something I'll look into doing in the future. But at the time of writing, carts of the Game Boy release are pretty reasonably priced. So if you're as intrigued by the series as I was, I'd say there's perhaps no greater place to start than the Game Boy. If you decide to climb the tower, let me know how you find it. And that brings us to the end of another Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please click that subscribe button and let me know what you think. Until next week, Game Boys and Girls, where I'll be back with another Japanese exclusive. As always, please, game on.